What's disastrous? I'm Mr. Beat, and you may be wondering, why am I hanging out at some random apartment complex? Well, this apartment complex isn't random. It's where I was living when I found out that the United States had just invaded Iraq. I was in college at the time. On March 19th, 2003, I remember coming home after a long day at class and work and turning on the TV to see this.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
And I saw footage like this. And reports like this.
It was just over 90 minutes beyond President Bush's deadline for Saddam Hussein to leave Iraq that U.S. warships and planes launched the opening salvo of Operation Iraqi Freedom.
And I remember being filled with anger and frustration. Why was my government doing this? Wasn't this an unjust war? Well, I wasn't the only one who felt this way.
We live in a time where we have a man sending us to war for fictitious reasons. We are against this war, Mr. Bush. Shame on you, Mr. Bush. Shame on you. And anytime you've got the Pope and the Dixie Chicks against you, your time is up. Thank you very much.
But, as you could hear from those boos in the audience from those liberal Hollywood actors at the Oscars, many Americans thought this war was just. As in, it was okay. So now you know my bias, as you should know my bias. But in this video, I'm going to try to ignore my own bias and tell you the story of one of the most controversial wars in American history, the Iraq War. It's 1998. The country of Iraq is headed by a ruthless dictator named Saddam Hussein. A ruthless dictator infamously known for killing as many as 250,000 of his own citizens, sometimes using chemical weapons to do so. A ruthless dictator who had invaded a smaller country to the south in what became known as the Persian Gulf War. I got a video about that. Yeah. Hussein was not a nice dude, and by 1998, the United States was actively supporting efforts to remove him from power. Heck, the United States Congress even passed a law that President Bill Clinton signed calling for just that, after the United States accused Hussein of developing weapons of mass destruction, and after he refused to let the United Nations look for them, Clinton ordered Operation Desert Fox, which led to the American military dropping bombs on approximately 100 military sites around Iraq, killing or wounding as many as 1,400 Iraqis. Flash forward to September 11th, 2001, the day of the deadliest attack on American soil and the deadliest terrorist attack in world history ever. I made a whole video about 9/11, but if you just want the... Oh yeah, there it is. Ha! How you doing? But if you just want the gist of it, on September 11th, 2001, terrorists associated with the group Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 planes with the goal of crashing those 4 planes into 4 prominent American buildings. They crashed 2 into the World Trade Center and 1 into the Pentagon, ultimately killing nearly 3,000 people. In an attempt to hunt down those responsible for 9/11, the United States government invaded Afghanistan and fought a war there for 20 years. But it wasn't just Afghanistan that the United States sent troops to. Oh no. With the authorization for use of military force, Congress gave President George W. Bush the power to fight terrorism all over the world. In fact, the country has been fighting the so-called war on terrorism ever since. So what does 9/11 have to do with Iraq? Well, nothing. But many in the Bush administration wanted to link the two. In fact, they had been looking for an excuse to invade Iraq for years, and perhaps 9/11 was their chance. One of the loudest voices to link 9/11 with Saddam Hussein was a dude named Paul Wolfowitz, who served as the U.S. Deputy Secretary of Defense at the time. He argued that Hussein was helping terrorists around the world and basically said that taking him out would go far in ending terrorism around the world. Wolfowitz even compared Hussein to the head of a snake. Quote, "It's almost like cutting off the head of the snake and the rest of the body will go." It wasn't just Wolfowitz. His boss, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, also was hoping this new war on terrorism would give them a chance to take out Hussein. He began going around telling the press stuff like this.
They've weaponized chemical weapons. We know that. They've had an active program to develop nuclear weapons. It's also clear that they are actively developing biological weapons. I don't know what other kinds of weapons would fall under the rubric of weapons of mass destruction, but if there are more, I suspect they're working on them as well, even though I don't happen to know what they are.
And this.
The big thing that was there was the weapon of mass destruction issue, and he had agreed, and the UN had agreed, that he would not have a WMD program. We know he does have one, and he is continuing it.
Soon, Vice President Dick Cheney was sounding the alarm about Hussein.
Simply stated, there is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction. There is no doubt that he is amassing them to use them against our friends, against our allies, and against us.
Oh, there was plenty of doubt. But Cheney also was really wanting to go to war with Iraq. And finally, the president himself was now sounding the alarm about Hussein, pleading his case to the American people directly.
I take the fact that he develops weapons of mass destruction very seriously. I remember the fact that he has invaded 2 countries before. I know for a fact that he's poisoned his own people. The regime must allow witnesses to its illegal activities to be interviewed outside of the country. These witnesses must be free to bring their entire families with them, so they're beyond the reach of Saddam Hussein's terror, Saddam Hussein's torture, Saddam Hussein's murder. In addition to declaring and destroying all of its weapons of mass destruction, Iraq, in accordance with UN Security Council demands, must end its support for terrorism.
Heck, as early as January 29th, 2002, during his State of the Union address, he was talking trash.
Iraq continues to flaunt its hostility toward America and to support terror. The Iraqi regime has plotted to develop anthrax and nerve gas and nuclear weapons for over a decade.
I mean, it's no surprise, really, that President Bush wanted to take out Saddam Hussein. Bush had hated Hussein for years, especially after Hussein threatened and possibly even planned to kill his dad, George Bush Sr. Anyway, and just so we're clear here, even though they had absolutely no evidence to back this up, the Bush administration just kept arguing that Hussein not only had weapons of mass destruction, but was giving these weapons of mass destruction to terrorists to attack the United States again. Well, this fear-mongering freaked Americans out for sure, including members of Congress.
Intelligence reports show that Saddam Hussein has worked to rebuild his chemical and biological weapons stock, his missile delivery capability, and his nuclear program. He has also given aid, comfort, and sanctuary to terrorists, including al-Qaeda members.
In October 2002, Congress passed the Authorization of Use of Military Force Against Iraq resolution, which said that President Bush could send troops into Iraq to take out Hussein's government if needed. That said, the law also, quote, encouraged diplomacy first, saying that the Bush administration should work with the United Nations to see if Hussein would hand over weapons of mass destruction before invading. It's worth noting that most Americans Americans wanted diplomacy to be continued before any kind of invasion. Still, the British government and even the United States Department of Defense found hardly any evidence of the development of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. At this point, there's plenty of evidence that shows that the Bush administration was planning on invading Iraq, whether they found weapons of mass destruction there or not. Still, it'd be nice to at least get the United Nations on board with it, am I right? In November 2002, the United Nations sent weapons inspectors to Iraq, but they ultimately never found any, even after around 700 inspections, man. And yet, on February 5th, 2003, the well-respected Secretary of State, Colin Powell, who also happened to be a general during the Persian Gulf War, made his case for invading Iraq to the United Nations Security Council.
The facts and Iraq's behavior show that Saddam Hussein and his regime are concealing their efforts to produce more weapons of mass destruction. Saddam Hussein has no compunction about using them again against his neighbors and against his own people. And we have sources who tell us that he recently has authorized his field commanders to use them. He wouldn't be passing out the orders if he didn't have the weapons or the intent to use them.
However, Hans Blix, the dude in charge of the weapons inspections of Iraq, accused Powell and the entire Bush administration, for that matter, of beating the war drums without sufficient evidence. The CIA even investigated Blix in an apparent attempt to undermine him since he was hurting support for an invasion. By March, even though UN inspections were still ongoing, and despite the fact that anti-war protests were building around the world, the United States prepared for an invasion anyway. Many of the world's most powerful countries were against an invasion. Still, the Bush administration was able to put together a multinational force of at least 48 countries to help them overthrow Hussein. Together, they were known as a, quote, coalition of the willing. In reality, most of these countries had little power and would contribute little to the war effort. Indeed, unlike the Persian Gulf War that happened just over 12 years prior, this was mainly a unilateral effort. Sure, the United Kingdom helped out quite a bit, but this invasion would mainly just be by American forces. Heck, even the Pope was like, yo, dudes, you sure you want to do this? Regardless, what became known as Operation Iraqi Freedom began on March 19th, 2003, when the United States began bombing Baghdad, Iraq's capital. 2 days later, American and British troops invaded southern Iraq. The invasion of Iraq lasted just over a month. As I said like a minute ago, it started with airstrikes on Iraqi military bases and the presidential palace in Baghdad. It was a surprise attack. There was no declaration of war or anything like that. According to Tommy Franks, the general who led the invasion, Operation Iraqi Freedom had 8 goals. Number 1, taking out Saddam Hussein. Number 2, finding and getting rid of Iraq's supposed weapons of mass destruction. Number 3, looking for and getting rid of terrorists in the country. Well, that could take a while, couldn't it? Number 4, gathering intelligence to destroy global terrorist networks. Number 5, gathering intelligence to find weapons of mass destruction around the world. Number 6, ending sanctions and getting humanitarian support to Iraqi citizens, presumably hurt under Hussein's control. Number 7, securing Iraq's oil fields. Okay, I know what you're all thinking, but Franks argued that the American troops would be securing this oil for the Iraqi people. I don't know. And finally, number 8, helping the Iraqi people transition to a representative democracy. Approximately 160,000 troops, again mostly American and British troops, landed in southern Iraq beginning on March 21st, 2003. They met little resistance. Only Hussein's most loyal supporters fought back, many of them fighting back in Basra. Still, the Americans and British fairly easily defeated them and soon worked northwest, up through the Tigris-Euphrates river system toward Baghdad, skipping over areas where resistance was stronger. By April 4th, American forces had taken over Baghdad's international airport. Iraq's Republican Guard defended Baghdad, but its defense was very disorganized. American forces bombarded and raided the city in what became known as the Battle of Baghdad. By April 9th, American soldiers had already taken control of the city. Kurdish fighters from the north helped the Americans capture the northern Iraqi cities of Kirkuk and Mosul by April 11th. And finally, Saddam's home city of Tikrit fell on April 13th. Isolated groups of soldiers loyal to Hussein continued to fight in the following days, but by the end of the month, the United States had controlled basically most of Iraq. The initial invasion cost the lives of nearly 13,000 Iraqis and just 172 coalition soldiers. On May 1st, 2003, President Bush made his now infamous televised Mission Accomplished speech aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln just off the coast of San Diego. In case you were wondering, San Diego is on the opposite side of the world as Iraq.
Major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
Now, I know this speech has become a meme at this point. You know, it basically comes up anytime anyone declares victory too early in a crisis. But it's worth noting that Bush also said the following in this speech.
We have difficult work to do in Iraq.
And boy, was that an understatement. Little did Bush know that this war would go on for the next 8 years. Meanwhile, Saddam Hussein and his inner circle had gone into hiding.
We thought the war was over, and we celebrated, and we'd won the war eating ice cream. And
I thought they would hate us, but they didn't. You know, they didn't start hating us until we stayed.
If the coalition forces had just left Iraq on May 1st, perhaps this war wouldn't have been so controversial. One Gallup poll found that 79% of Americans thought the war had been justified, with or without clear evidence of weapons of mass destruction. And yet, the Americans stayed. And the insurgency portion of the war had now begun. An insurgent is a person who revolts against a government or authority. Soon after Bush declared victory on May 1st, 2003, the first armed insurgents began to attack American soldiers. In the beginning, these insurgents were just Saddam Hussein loyalists refusing to surrender. However, soon the insurgents were Islamist extremists seeing the overthrow of Hussein as an opportunity to create an Islamist government. Oh hey, speaking of Hussein, American forces were soon closing in on him. They had killed his sons, Uday and Qusay, in a shootout in Mosul, as well as killed or captured at least 300 of his top leaders in his government. On December 13th, 2003, they found Hussein hiding on a farm just outside Tikrit. He surrendered, and the new Iraqi government found him guilty of crimes against humanity and sentenced him to death by hanging. You can watch the footage of it online. I'm not even joking. Anyway, even though American forces had captured Hussein, insurgency was on the rise. And now many of the insurgents were Iraqis mad about the occupying forces refusing to leave. Kidnappings, murders, car bombs, suicide bombings, and highway blasts caused by improvised explosive devices, or IEDs, became much more common and increasingly put the lives of American soldiers at risk. Things got worse in April 2004 when word got out about American soldiers torturing Iraqi prisoners at Abu Ghraib prison. This led to a flood of Islamist militants into Baghdad. And talk about bad timing. This all went down when the American military was trying to prop up a new Iraqi government. Meanwhile, the Iraq War hadn't hurt President Bush's popularity too much. yet. He'd win re-election in 2004. But if Americans actually knew how bad the war would get over the next 2 years, he likely would have not gotten re-elected. In 2005, millions of Iraqis voted to draft a new constitution and vote for new representatives and a president. But, that didn't go so well. Sunnis boycotted the elections, resulting in the Shiites gaining power. Oh, wait. You may not know what the words Sunni and Shiite mean. I guess I better explain what they mean, eh? Sunni Islam is just a branch of Islam. The largest branch of Islam, as a matter of fact. Shia Islam is the second largest branch. Iraq is unique in that the country has a fairly even divide between Shiites and Sunnis within its borders. One big development during the Iraq War was actually a smaller conflict within a bigger one. Radicalized Iraqi Shiites and Iraqi Sunnis began attacking each other. Sunnis accused Shiite leaders of killing Sunni leaders and blowing up bombs in Sunni neighborhoods. Sunnis retaliated, and the cycle of violence spiraled out of control, especially after the bombing of the Al-Ashqari shrine on February 22, 2006. At one point, Baghdad became so violent that it averaged around 33 deaths a day. Most of the violence, though, was based in the Sunni-dominated areas of Iraq, particularly in the provinces of Al-Anbar and Saladin. By the end of 2006, all of this violence and destruction had led to the displacement of hundreds of thousands of ordinary Iraqis. One spot where insurgents were particularly active during the Iraq War was Ramadi, in the Al-Anbar province. For 6 months in 2006, American forces fought Al-Qaeda in the city in what became known as the Battle of Ramadi. Yeah, you heard that right. Al-Qaeda. One particularly crazy development that happened during the war was Al-Qaeda showing up to Iraq for the first time. Yep, they weren't there before, and no links were ever found between the Hussein regime and Al-Qaeda. But after the overthrow of the Hussein regime and after American occupation, not only were they there, but they be recruiting. Oh, and they also now had Saddam's old chemical weapons from back in the day. Now that Al-Qaeda was actually in Iraq, Bush was like, well, I guess we better send more troops, eh? And that's exactly what happened. In January 2007, Bush announced plans for a surge. No, not the soda pop. A surge, as in a quick increase in the number of American troops in Iraq to restore security there.
If we increase our support at this crucial moment and help the Iraqis break the current cycle of violence, we can hasten the day our troops begin coming home.
He sent 30,000 additional troops and extended deployments by 3 months. Well, 2007 ended up being the deadliest year for American forces since 2004, but stability did follow and insurgent attacks went down afterward, though it's not clear if it was because of the surge or not. On February 10th, 2007, General David Petraeus took over as leader of the coalition forces. His leadership had been one of the few success stories during the war, much of it centered around his focus on rebuilding the country's infrastructure and redirecting funding directly to Iraqis. Still, by 2008, most Americans were done with this war. Polls now showed that a clear majority of Americans were against it and wanted the troops home. And not only did the war hurt the popularity of George W. Bush, but it hurt the popularity of the entire Republican Party. Barack Obama won the presidential election of 2008, in fact, promising to end the Iraq War. That said, around that time, the Iraqi parliament had already established a timetable to withdraw American forces. In February 2009, the newly elected President Obama said all American combat forces would be out of Iraq by August 31st, 2010. Well, this happened 2 weeks ahead of schedule.
I am announcing that the American combat mission in Iraq has ended. Operation Iraqi Freedom is over. and the Iraqi people now have lead responsibility for the security of their country.
That said, around 50,000 American soldiers remained in Iraq to help with the Iraqi military fully taking over. By that time, the whistleblower media organization WikiLeaks had released footage of what became known as the July 12, 2007 Baghdad airstrike. The video, which WikiLeaks called Collateral Murder, showed American troops aboard an Apache helicopter firing on and killing journalists and other civilians. This footage, as well as 400,000 secret American military documents from the war released by WikiLeaks later on that year, further turned Americans against the war. In October 2011, President Obama announced that the last 39,000 American soldiers in Iraq would leave the country by the end of 2011. And I wish that was the end of the story, but it's not. You see, almost as soon as American troops left, a power vacuum happened and insurgency once again went on the rise in Iraq. Sunni extremists stepped up attacks against the Shiite majority, and soon many of them teamed up with the Islamist extremists in Syria, a country bordering Iraq to the north, which had its own civil war going on. Well, long story short, this ultimately led to another freaking war. That's right. The Iraq War led to the war in Iraq. By December 30th, 2013, the insurgency had turned into all-out guerrilla warfare all across western Iraq with the rise of the Islamic State, aka the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, aka the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, aka ISIS. By the end of 2015, ISIS controlled an area where millions of Iraqis lived. The Iraqi government eventually defeated them by 2019, but only after coalition forces returned to aid them. In fact, today, and I bet you didn't know this, but there are still around 2,500 American soldiers stationed in Iraq to assist Iraqi soldiers there. By most accounts, the Iraq War was a disaster. Likely at least 1 million people died directly because of it. It led to the displacement of millions of Iraqis. It cost trillions of dollars. Not billions, trillions. It led to one of the biggest humanitarian crises in modern history. And today, the Iraqis are still recovering from its devastation. Although, to be fair, things are way better there now than they used to be. Similar to the Vietnam War, which happened 30 years prior, the Iraq War further eroded American trust in their government. Today, most of us view it as an unnecessary war, a war that just made things worse for everyone involved. By invading and conquering Iraq in 2003 and then occupying it for 9 years after that, the United States ended up destabilizing not only the entire country, but the entire freaking region. Before the war, there was no proven connection between the Iraqi government and Al-Qaeda, and yet this war was so disastrous that it literally, ironically, you could say, caused Al-Qaeda to take over major parts of Iraq. Holy crap. The Iraq War hurt the international reputation of not only the United States, but also the United Kingdom. It hurt global efforts to fight terrorism. Heck, the Iraq War made the majority of Americans sick of wars in general. After that, when the American government tried to drum up support for war in a foreign country in the name of, quote, spreading democracy or, quote, nation building, most Americans just didn't fall for it anymore. And not just Democrats, I'd argue that just as many Republicans today say the Iraq War was a mistake as Democrats, as demonstrated by the rise of Donald Trump, who has made no secret of his dissatisfaction with that war. But perhaps that's one silver lining of the Iraq War. Before it, we were much more likely to fall for an unjust war. After it, we weren't. In 2003, back when I lived in these apartments behind me, I was young and an idiot. But even back then, I knew that this war was unjust. I mean, I'm still an idiot, but that's besides the point. Just making sure that we're clear here on that. Obviously, I left a lot out in this video. This was just an introduction to the Iraq War, but if you want to learn more, I have listed sources in the description of this video. Again, I am biased. I lived during the Iraq War. I have family and friends who were in the Iraq War, so obviously I'm going to have an opinion about it. Anyway, I think I did the best I could. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.